In terms of how much does the average household spends on food in 1 year, answers $8,100 or about $681 a month. This is going to be something that we talk about when we talk about what we call our spending leaks, which is when you think you're spending, let's say, $100 on something, but you're really spending $200 on something. So, for example, maybe you think you're, buying your own groceries and things like that, but then you end up eating out a lot, and it really increases the amount you spend on food every year. That'll be something we discuss. And then we're going to talk about credit scores. So credit scores go from 350 to 850. So here in the DMV, the average credit score is 716, so a little bit higher than the average American one. But we're going to talk all about what goes into your credit score, as well as how you can increase your credit score over time. So one of the goals today is, again, not having you memorize all these facts and things we're going to talk about today, but is really to get you excited and hopefully get you on track to sort of creating your own financial plan. And like I said, we're going to talk about the several elements of it, from knowing how much income you have coming in each month and how much you have going out in expenses, to planning your goals, to ensuring you have good credit, and then saving for the future. Because what happens to some people is, money can be a very uncomfortable topic for a lot of people, and that is totally understandable. Some people might not have grown up without a lot of money, or maybe had a lot of money and then, don't have it now. There's a wide range of situations that people have. But no matter where you're from, what I'm hoping to do is to get you sort of on the right track in terms of actually creating a plan and engaging with your money. Because oftentimes we find that the people who at least engage with your money and are willing to make decisions and sort of understand where you are often end up on the best track going forward, no matter how much that you start with when you're just getting going. So let's talk about, this is sort of our table and contents for what we're going to discuss today. So first, we're going to talk about assessing your current financial situation. So we're going to talk about, understanding how much you have in income and expenses, your net worth, which is how much you own in assets versus how much you owe in debt, just to get a sense of where you are today. And another theme that I'm going to talk about here is that, where you are today is not necessarily where you're going to be tomorrow. So, especially once you're starting out in the workplace, you might have, you'll start with a certain salary, but, your salary will hopefully grow over time as you get new jobs or promotions or things like that. You might have certain expenses today, and sometimes your expenses could increase or decrease as it is. So, that's one of the big things, is that even if you're in a tough spot today or just starting out, that's not the way it's always going to be, hopefully. And we'll talk about goals to help you sort of look forward to where you want to be. We'll talk about creating a spending and saving plan. So this is the idea of you understand how much you have coming in each month from your job or other sources, and how much you have going out each month. And then hopefully you'll have savings so that you have more coming in than you have going out, and then deciding what to do with that savings. And then we'll talk about understanding and maintaining good credit. Having a good credit score is one of the important foundations of of having a good financial situation, because it determines not only your ability to borrow money if you ever need like a car loan or something like that, but it'll also help determine we'll see a lot of other companies and landlords and things like that will often use your credit score as well. So again, we'll talk about how to build your credit. All right, so a lot to talk about today. So let's start with assessing your current financial situation. So this is an exercise. So, there's a few times today where I'll introduce an exercise that you can hopefully do within a few hours. So if you have time tonight or this weekend, set aside just like a small block of time for yourself to do these exercises. This is the kind of thing you can do, like listen, maybe not watching TV, but like listen to music in the background, like, have some, good food, whatever you like, and like really dive into it. So, the first step is assessing your current financial situation. So this is talking about your income and expenses. So take in all your sources of income. whether you have a job, you're receiving a stipend, maybe you have a side gig, side hustle, all of that income you have. So tally that up. And in terms of that, I would say tally up your net income, the amount that actually hits your bank account. So after taxes and things like that, because that's the net income is the amount of income you have available to spend. So that's what you should be working from here. Next, I want you to tally up all your monthly expenses. So for that, you could look at your, if you use a debit card, your debit card statement. If you use a credit card, your credit card statement. If you use cash a lot, that'll be a little bit trickier. But if you do that, start saving some of your receipts, or when you buy something in cash, look at it in your, you can write it down in your notes app, something like that, just so you can have a better idea of how much you're spending. Looking at your Venmo too. So every place you're spending money, try to get an accurate picture of how much you're spending each month. Because now, again, like I said before, this is going to allow you to make that comparison. Where do I stand? Do I have more money coming in each month than I have going out? In which case you'll have an opportunity to save. Or is it the other way? Do I have more money going out than I have coming in? In which case that's, sort of alarm bells are going off, because that means you're going into debt in some way. And that's something where we're going to want to turn around. And we'll talk about much more about ways you can do that shortly. But that'll set you up just to know how much you have coming in and going out. Now, if you do just that, is how much money going out, you'll be ahead of a very significant portion of the American population. If you went up to a random person on the street and said, do you know how much income you have coming in and how much expenses you have every month? I bet less than 30% of people would know that off the top of their heads. So by just knowing that, you'll know sort of where you stand. Now, the other piece of this is, so that's your income and expenses. The other piece is knowing your net worth, which is your assets minus your liabilities. So assets are money or other property that you own. So maybe you have money in a checking account or money in a savings account. Those are all assets. Maybe you have an investment account. That's an asset. If you have a car, the value of that is an asset. You might not own a home, but that would be an asset as well. So you want to think about all these things that you own that if you were able to sell would have value. So it might not be, so usually it's sort of larger items like that. So, okay, those are your assets. Then you need to think of your liabilities. So a liability is just a complicated way of saying money that you owe to someone else. So do you have any loans? Maybe you could have a student loan or a car loan, a personal loan, anything like that, or credit card debt. If you have money on your that you've put on a credit card, that's a debt. That's a liability. So you add up all those together. So then you subtract all of those liabilities from your assets, and that gives you your net worth. So let's just say right now you have $1,000 in your checking account and you have $1,000 in your savings account. So that would be $2,000 in assets. And then hopefully, let's say you have no liabilities right now. You don't owe any money on credit cards or anything. So that would be 2,000 minus 0 would give you a $2,000 net worth. And something I will say is that, for the American public as a whole, if you have a positive net worth, you're in pretty good shape. I don't know the exact number, but, even if it's a very small positive net worth, you're putting yourself on the right track. Because if you have a negative net worth, that means you have more debt than you have assets. Well, hopefully you have enough income to pay off that debt, but you really want to try to turn that around so your net worth is positive, and then will grow and grow and grow over time. So, the ideal scenario is going to be you have more income than income than expenses, which means you're able to save, and that you'll be able to apply that savings to your net worth. So your net worth grows and grows over time. So, okay, so with those two pieces, you'll have a good sense of knowing where you are. And depending on how complicated your situation is, it might take you an hour to figure out all of that. It might take you a little bit, it might take a little bit longer. So, again, that's a really good exercise to do in an evening and understand where you are. And the nice thing about that is oftentimes if you do it the first time, then it'll be easier and easier to check in, check in every 6 months or something like that, especially as your situation changes. If maybe you move into an apartment or you get a full-time job, your income will change, your expenses will change. So it's good to keep up with what's going on. Okay, so now that we know where we are, let's talk about setting goals to look ahead to where we could be in the future. So when we talk about goals, we often use this acronym, SMART. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And so this will help you set goals that you keep and are very specific for the future. So let's see, let's take a goal that might not fall under this. So we might say, I want to be rich in the future. Like, okay, that could be a good goal. But let's see how we could improve this goal using the SMART framework. So for example, in SMART, we want a goal that's specific, well-defined. So, and let's go to the M as well. So measurable, you'll know when you achieve it. So when we think about our goal to be rich, let's say, well, it's kind of specific. Okay, it has to do with money, but it's not very measurable. We don't know what it means to be rich. So for example, for some people, rich might be having, a positive net worth. Someone who's had a negative net worth their whole lives, you could feel rich just by having a positive net worth, because now you own more assets than liabilities. Maybe someone else, they want to have a net worth of $1 million or $100,000, whatever it is, could make them feel rich. So let's set a goal. Let's set a measurable goal. Let's say I want to have a net worth of $10,000. Let's say that's our goal. So the next level is achievable. So is it possible to achieve this goal? Well, it depends where your situation is, but having a net worth of $10,000, I think something that could be done. Is it realistic? And let's say time bound here is the really important one. So it's not, if I'm starting with zero, having a net worth of $10,000 by the end of the year, that might be pretty tough. But let's say I want to have a net worth of $10,000 by 5 years from now, or whatever it is. You want to put a time on it. So now we've gone from, a very broad goal to something that's very specific, achievable, and time bound, because that'll keep you to doing it. Because that way, let's say I want to have a net worth of $10,000 in 5 years from now. Well, that means you probably want to save about $2,000 a year for 5 years, would give you $10,000. So that will help you check to see if you're on track for your goal. And I should say, your goal could be anything. You could be saving up money for a car. You could be saving up for money to move into an apartment, and it could be a wide range of things. But whenever it is, think of creating specific, measurable goals. So it's not just, I want to save money for a car. It's, I want to have $2,000 saved for a down payment by the end of the year. Again, we're making it realistic, time bound, for your particular situation. And when it comes to goals, think both in the short, medium, and long term. So, a short-term goal might be saving for a car. A medium-term goal, 3 to 10 years, maybe it's saving a certain amount of money, or maybe you're saving to buy a house. And a long-term goal, more than 10 years away, that could be something like saving for retirement. And we'll talk a little bit more about retirement a little later on. But for your goal list, you might have a lot of different goals. Two things that are really important are building an emergency fund and obtaining proper insurance, which we're going to talk a little bit more about shortly. These are two things that'll help you make sure you stay on a solid financial track. So here's a little bit more just in terms of the SMART goals, some questions to ask yourself. Because again, you want to make sure, and this is, I will say this here too, a big thing when it comes to money is that, and this is sort of life in general, is you want to, what I call, play your own game, which means that you're setting up financial goals for yourself and what you want to do. Not the financial goals that, some stranger that you see on, TikTok or the internet has for you, or that your friends, maybe you could have friends that are pursuing something totally different. By playing your game, you're going to be following your goals. You're going to be following what you're looking, not so what someone else is following, what you're following. And I find that then over time, you'll start achieving your goals and you'll see your accomplishments that you're achieving for yourself and not worrying what other people are accomplishing or not accomplishing. So again, this fits within the SMART framework, especially on the relevance side. Does the goal add to your plans for your future, not for someone else's, your own? So again, when you're thinking about these goals, and when you're thinking about your finances in general, ask yourself, am I playing my own game or am I playing someone else's game who might have totally different goals? So just something to ask yourself. Here's again another example of a SMART goal. Again, feel free to come back to this slide if you'd like. And let's talk a little bit about building an emergency fund. So an emergency fund is a separate savings or bank account used to cover very unexpected expenses. So like an illness or an accident, a car repair, things like that. So things you can't expect. It's not paying for like the monthly rent, which, comes up every month. It's something that like comes totally out of the blue. And so what you do is you save up money in this separate account. So let's say you have a checking account, maybe you have a savings account as well. So you keep this money separate. So you're not, it's not the money you see coming in and out every month, like in your checking account. But in your savings account, you set aside a little bit of money, and it depends on your personal situation. Maybe you can afford to put away $50 a month or $100 a month, whatever it is. But by building up the emergency fund over time, you're going to be able to handle larger and larger expenses. So, let's say you're able to save $50 a month for 1 year. That would give you $600 in your emergency fund, which is great. That can cover a lot of unexpected expenses. Because as your emergency fund grows, it'll give you what's called peace of mind. The knowledge in your head that whatever situation or emergency situation comes up, you'll be able to handle it without having to ask someone else for money or putting money on a credit card or going into debt. So this is what the emergency fund can be really helpful for, is giving you the confidence that, if something bad comes up, you'll be able to handle it. So this is a great financial goal. And so as you're sort of allocating your savings, one of the best things that you can start out with and building. In terms of how much you should put in the emergency fund, that's going to depend on your specific situation. Sometimes people will say 3 to 6 months of your total expenses, but that's a lot of money to think about building from the beginning. So again, even if you have to start small, the key is just to get started. Every month, send a little money to that savings account. Because even if you just have $50 or $100, well, that's $100 more than you had before, and can cover different things. So again, make it a habit of regularly contributing to your emergency fund. All right. Let's see. So again, it's going to depend on your personal situation, but again, make it a habit. One thing that you could do is what we call pay yourself first, which is that when you have a job, your employer will usually let you send your money in your paycheck to multiple accounts. So, maybe right now you're having all your money sent to your checking account, but what you can do is have them send some money to your savings account automatically. So let's say you've looked at your income and expenses and you've decided, okay, I can save $100 a month for my emergency fund. So you can tell your employer, let's say your paycheck is $1,000. So you can tell them, okay, send $900 each paycheck to my checking account and send $100 to my savings account. And this is really nice because now you don't have to remember to send that money to your savings account. It's going to automatically go in each month or each paycheck. So that's a great way to see your account grow. And, you might, and a few months later, you'll check on it and be like, wow, I have $500 in my checking account. And it was very painless in sending the money over. So paying yourself first and sending the money automatically to both checking and savings accounts can be a nice way to not just build up an emergency fund, but your other goals that you might have and might have an account for. The other sort of foundational goal is obtaining proper insurance. So there's lots of different types of insurance out there, but when I think of insurance, I think of the key is that you want insurance to cover expenses that you wouldn't be able to cover on your own. So let's talk about some examples on that. So one of those is renters or homeowners insurance. So if you own a home, you're required to have homeowners insurance, but renters insurance is an optional one, but it can be really handy because what it does is it'll cover all of your stuff in case there's a robbery or if there's a fire, things like that. So it's nice that your stuff's covered, but it also covers liability in the sense of if someone gets like injured in your apartment, that would cover like their medical bills and things like that. And it's really inexpensive. So if you are a renter, you own your own apartment, I would highly encourage you to look into renters insurance because it's really cheap every month. Another one that's really important is car insurance. If you have a car or drive a car, I would highly, it's typically highly useful to have car insurance, because what car insurance covers is, you might think of it as covering your car if you were in an accident, which is true. It'll cover, it can, depending on your coverage, it'll cover the damage to your car. But the key is it covers, if you're in an accident and it's determined you were at fault, it not only covers the damage to the other person's car, but more importantly, it covers the liability of things like their medical bills. And that's where car accidents can be very expensive. If someone's really injured and goes to the hospital, that can be tens of thousands of dollars. So you want to have car insurance to cover that bill, because there's not many people that can cover, a $10,000, $15,000, $50,000 expense. So I would highly encourage you to get car insurance if you drive a car, and then make sure you check your coverages to make sure it's enough to cover the expenses if you were in an accident. I should say too, this is a good place to remind you, something we do here at BrightPaths is we offer free one-on-one coaching sessions. So if you have questions about insurance, that's a good question to talk to us about, and our information will be at the end of the session. Other types of insurance, I'll say that the other one I will highlight is health insurance. Now, most Americans get health insurance through their employer, through their job, but some jobs don't offer health insurance, in which case other ways include staying on your parents' health insurance, which you can do until you reach age 26, if they have health insurance. Other options are the health insurance marketplace, which has different types of policies and benefits there. If you're lower income, Medicaid is the health insurance program for lower income people. So lots of ways to health insurance. But similar, as we were talking about cars, medical bills can be extremely expensive. Even if you think, you're a younger, healthier person now, if you were in like an accident or something like that, those bills can really add up, tens of thousands of dollars. So we would typically encourage people to get health insurance as well. Okay, let me double check. Oh, sure. Someone asked in the chat, if you have a business, how do you calculate your business worth? Yeah, that's a pretty tough question in terms of like a business valuation. There's people who do that, but I would think of your business for now more as of thinking of like, what's your income and business expenses? I think it's much more important for your business for thinking about in terms of your spending and saving, as opposed to the business worth. Over time, if it grows to the level where you could potentially sell it, there's people out there who do business valuations. But I think now, think of it more of in terms of your income and expenses as opposed to your assets and liabilities. Good question, though. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so we've talked a little bit about the spending and savings plan. Again, the key here is to know how much you have coming in and how much you have going out each month. There's lots of ways to do it. You might have heard the term budget before. This is just a fancy way of saying knowing how much you have coming in and going out each month. But something I would encourage you to do is to take all of those expenses and put them into categories. You can kind of see this here. So understand how much is going to rent, how much is going to groceries, how much is going to transportation, things like that. Because what I really want to talk about here is that, I'll come back to that. This one is the idea of identifying spending leaks, which I talked a little bit about before. Because this is the idea of knowing how much you're spending in certain categories and making sure that matches up to what you value. So in terms of your spending, there's two things to think about. One is spending within your means. So making sure your expenses are less than your income. And not necessarily just $1 less if possible, significantly less, because the bigger gap you have between your spending and your expenses, the more money you have to save and put towards your SMART goals. So if you have a gap of, let's say, $300 a month, well, now maybe I put $100 towards my emergency fund, I put $100 towards a short-term goal and $100 towards a medium-term goal that I have. So the bigger gap you're able to create, the better off you'll be and the more you'll be able to achieve your goals. And again, this is going to change over time. When you're just getting started, sometimes your expenses will be really close to your income. But what I'd encourage you to do is, as your income increases over time, that gives you an opportunity to make that gap wider. Because as long as you don't increase your expenses by the same amount, you'll be able to you'll go from maybe saving $100 a month to $200 to $300 and more. So anytime you get a pay increase or a bonus or a tax refund, anything like that, use that as an opportunity to increase your savings. But another way to increase your savings is by minding your expenses and minding what we call spending leaks. So this is the idea that you're spending more in a certain category than you want to be. So I talked about this example before, but a common place where people have spending leaks is food. So, let's say you count up all your expenses next month and you see that you're spending $500 on food, let's say. And you're like, wow, I had no idea I was spending that much. I thought it was way less. Maybe you find out that you're spending, $300 on groceries and $200 on eating out. Maybe you go to 7-Eleven as you're walking to and from work every day, something like that. So this is an idea of where you're spending on something that you don't really value. That's another one of these sort of big messages about money, is spending on what's important to you. So for some people, there are some real foodies out there and they want to spend money on food, which is great. But if that's not something you value, maybe you want to shift your spending to something else, which you do. Maybe it's, being able to go out with friends, or maybe you have a hobby you like to spend money on, whatever it is. But to focus your spending on your value, and then perhaps finding ways to cut spending in the other areas. So if, for example, you find your food budget's over, maybe instead of going out to lunch 3 times a week, maybe you turn it to 1 time a week. It's not cutting out everything fun. You want to spend on what you value. It's just finding the things that are less important to you and finding ways to cut the expenses here. And, this slide here is some pretty good examples that we've found among people we work with. So whether it's dining out instead of going to groceries, shopping at convenience stores, a lot of times stuff at CVS and drugstores at 7-Eleven is a lot more expensive than you could get as opposed to going to, Walmart or Target or the grocery store. So that's another good one. Habits, downloads, your phone, it's so easy now to spend money on apps and other purchases on your phone. So, when you're counting your expenses, make sure you have a good idea of those, because those can really add up over time. As we'll see on this slide, let's say you go out to coffee once or every day before work. If it costs $3.65, that's $18 a week, $73 a month, and $1,000 per year. So again, if we cut that from 5 days, so again, I'm not telling you never go out to have coffee. That's a nice way to hang out with friends and things and all like that. But in this case, it's well, what if I just cut that back to 1 day a week? If I cut that coffee from 5 days a week to 1 day a week, it'll go from spending $1,000 a year to $200. So now I have $800. That could be a terrific emergency fund. Again, you're still able to have your nice coffee, just a little bit less often than you used to. And this works for everything. Let's say you're going, what's at the bottom, apps and subscriptions. Let's say you spend $10 4 times a month. That's $40 a month, or almost $500 a year. Again, if you could cut that down by, let's say to $100 a year, now you've saved about $400 that can go to your other goals. So again, this is not about, cutting everything fun or everything nice, but think about, again, what you value. You're I really like going to coffee with my friend once a week. That's great. Definitely keep that going. But maybe it's the times I go by myself to coffee because I forgot to make it at home. Maybe that's the kind of thing you cut out. And you'll find that when you do that, again, now you're creating this bigger gap between your income and your expenses. And the bigger the gap, the more money you have to save, the higher your savings or your net worth will be over time. Okay, so this is sort of the end of our section on creating a spending and saving plan. So, a couple of big things that we talked about. Again, continue to track your spending and your expenses. If you can do it once a month, that's great, every couple months, but you want to understand, how much you have coming in, how much you have going out, because it's going to change over time. And also, as you make changes, whether it's earning more income or adjusting your expenses, it's going to change, and you might find that you have more money to save for your SMART goals. And so again, over time, you'll see, like, again, your gap might be really tight today, but it's going to expand over time. And the key is knowing when your income expands or when your expenses go down, and then using that money to achieve your goals, having those goals in mind, whether it's creating an emergency fund, saving money for a car, a home, whatever it is, vacation, having those goals in mind, so you save for the goals and then hopefully achieve them over time. All right, so let's, all right, so now we're gonna move on to credit. Oh, someone asked in the comments, what's the most important financial habit or skill that everyone should develop to improve their well-being? There's a lot of different things you could say, but I think the biggest one for me is being aware of your money. So being aware, again, like just what we said, of what's coming in, what's going out every month. Because again, like I said before, money, people have a lot of different feelings and emotions around money, and that's totally fine to do. So it could be, I think the biggest hurdle and the biggest thing is just knowing where you're at and tracking that over time. Because if you do that, you'll see how your income and expenses change, and you'll see and make sure for yourself that you're ending up on the positive side. So coming up, we're going to talk about some of the more technical issues, but I think that's the big one, is having a willingness to engage with your money over time. So good question. So now let's talk about credit. So credit is your ability to borrow money. And so when you borrow money, let's say a friend came up to you and asked to, borrow $10 for something. Well, you might just give it to them, but you might want to know, well, what's the likelihood that this friend is going to pay you back? Have you lent them money before, and have they paid you back before? Or did you lend money and they didn't? Maybe you heard from another one of your friends that they lent them money, but they didn't pay them back. Well, in which case you might not want to lend them money this time. That dynamic is basically what a credit report is. So a credit report is basically your history of borrowing money and paying it back. So let's say you might have had a credit card or a student loan or a car loan. So if you've paid all your payments in full every month, that's going to show up on your credit report. If you've missed payments, that's going to show up on your credit report. So that people who want to lend you money, or you ask to lend you money in the future, will look at this report and say, okay, has this person been reliable with paying these debts off in the past, or have they missed, or even worse, stopped paying their loans, or had what's called a charge-off, where they just stop paying their bills. In which case, someone in the future is probably going to say, oh, I don't think I want to lend them money because they haven't paid their bills back in the past. So that's all the credit report is. So now we're going to talk about some of the specifics about credit reports and how you can check it. So you're entitled to get a credit report for free from each of the 3 credit reporting bureaus once every 12 months. So today, this is another good, nighttime or weekend project. It'll take you only about 15 minutes to access and review your credit report. So the website to go, I think, is that on here? Yeah, okay, it's coming up. The website here to check your credit report, you can write this one down or else it's going to be on the slides, is at the bottom here, annualcreditreport.com. So this is the one place you can go where absolutely free, no strings attached, you can check your credit report for free once a year from each of the 3 credit reporting bureaus, which are Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. You can check all 3 at once. You probably don't really need to, but you could check the Equifax one today, wait several months, check TransUnion, and so on and so on. But what's important about checking your credit report is that there's a few things you want to look for. You want to check for errors. So your credit report is going to have things like your name, address, social security number possibly, but it's going to have your history of using credit accounts in the past. So it'll be credit cards, it'll be car loans, student loans, home loans, personal loans, all of that will be on your credit report. Now, if you don't have any credit, if you've never used credit before, your credit report might be very small because you won't have many credit accounts. But one of the important things to do in checking your credit report is looking for errors. So for example, especially accounts that you don't recognize. So if, let's say, you have one credit card and it's from Chase, let's say, but you see a credit card on your credit report from Discover, and you say, I've never opened a credit report from Discover. That means it's possible that someone else has opened a credit card in your name. in which case you'll need to contact both the credit card company and the credit reporting bureau to let them know, this is a fraudulent account, and they'll shut it down so, the person can't spend any money in your name. The information to do that is right on the website of the credit reporting bureaus, or you can go and you can go as well, because the credit reporting bureaus will then investigate and then clear that item off of your credit report. And then you'll also contact that credit card company to let them know it's fraudulent, and they'll close the card. So that's why it's part of the reason why it's important to check your credit report, is to make sure that your credit report is only showing the activity that you've had personally. And so the other thing you want to do on your credit report is to make sure it's factually accurate. So for example, like let's say you've had a credit card and you've never missed a payment before, that should show up on your credit report. That'll say you usually like okay or a check mark or something like that for each month on that you've had the credit card account. Same thing for loans. If you've paid off your car loan, let's say every single month, you'll see okay. If there's a missed payment that you made, that's another reason to make a dispute, which you can do online with the credit reporting bureaus, to say, hey, I actually made this payment. Because as we'll see shortly, if you have had things like missed payments or have had a default where you stopped paying on an account, those can hurt your credit score, which we'll talk about shortly. So again, a credit report, check at least once a year. If you do it more often, that's fine too. But if you've never checked it before, I would highly recommend doing so soon, just to make sure it looks accurate. So the credit report is great. That's sort of like the record of your history with credit. But now, for when you ask to borrow money, whether it's for a credit card or a loan, a company is going to want to see what's called your credit score. So a credit score is a company will take your all of that history in their credit report and put it together and give you an actual numerical score that'll show how good you've been with credit in the past. So typically credit scores, it depends who's doing it, but it either runs from 300 to 850, possibly 350 to 850. And as you can see here, it's the specific number is less important. What's more important is sort of what range you're in. So for example, there's not a big difference between being like 790 and 791, but there is a big difference between being 790 and like 690. Because as you can see here, anything from 780 to 850 would be exceptional. I've never seen someone with a perfect credit score before. So you don't have to worry about having an 850, but if you have, an 800, 825, you're within this exceptional range. Very good, 720 to 780, good, 670, 720, fair, 580 to 660, and so on and so on. So your goal with your credit score is really to move up these categories over time to hopefully eventually finding yourself in the exceptional category and staying there. Because with good credit, it's good for a few things. Not only is it be more likely that when you need a loan, you'll be able to access credit and you'll be approved for the loan, but the higher your credit score, the higher range that you're in here, the lower the interest rate that you'll pay. So for example, interest rates vary over time, but let's say if you have very good credit or exceptional credit, you might be able to get a car loan at, let's say, 5% these days. Whereas if you have very poor credit, you might pay 15% on your car loan. So your monthly payment with exceptional credit might be, depending on what kind of car it is, let's say it's $500. But if you have very poor credit, your monthly payment could be $800 or $900. So the key is but the better your credit, you'll be able to access loans if you need it, and you'll be able to pay a lower price for it. So you might ask, okay, well, how do I get a better credit score? Let's look at this slide. This shows what goes into your credit score. So the most important thing is your payment history at 35%. So this means your history of making on-time payments. Do you pay your credit card every month by the due date? Do you pay your student loans or other loan payments on time every month? If you do, you'll be really good in this payment history category. The second one is amounts owed or credit utilization. This is how much money do you owe in credit on credit cards compared to the amount available to you. So when you get a credit card, they'll give you a certain limit, a spending limit on the card. So let's say your limit is $3,000. If let's say you spent $50 this month on your credit card and paid the bill in full at the end of the month, that's really good. You'll have a very low credit utilization and you'll have a successful payment for your payment history. So if you just do that, spend only a little bit on your credit card and pay it in full at the end of every month, you'll be great for 65%, and I should say paying any other loans that you have as well. You'll be solid for 65% of what goes into the credit score. And with that, your credit score takes time to grow. So your credit score you'll slowly see build over time. On the other hand, let's say you had a high credit utilization. If your credit card limit is $3,000 and you have a $2,500 balance on there, that's what's called a high utilization. You're using almost all the amount of limit that's granted to you. And that will hurt your credit score because that shows that maybe, things don't look so good for your money because you're so close to the edge there. So in that case, you want to try your best to pay that down back as close to or zero as possible. So that'll lower your utilization. So again, 65% of your credit score is using credit responsibly, only putting a little bit on credit cards and paying it off in full at the end of the month. Now, some of the other things you'll see on here are length of credit history at 15%. So this is where you want to start using, if possible, credit or having access to credit as soon as possible, because that will start your credit history. So if, for example, we'll talk about getting a credit card shortly. If you don't have a credit card, it might be good to have one. Not to put a lot of spending on, but just to have, because that starts your credit history. And again, as if you put, a $5 or $10 thing on it and pay off your bill in full at the end of the month, now you'll have your credit history, amounts owed, and payment history covered, and you'll see your credit score grow over time. The other two categories are credit mix. This is have you had both credit cards and loans, like student loans or car loans? In this case, I would not get a loan just to improve this category because, again, it's only 10%. But naturally, over the years, you'll probably end up with some different types of loans. And finally, new credit. If you tried to apply for a lot of credit scores, a lot of credit cards at one time, that might make a lender worried that, they might be really in trouble with money if they need that much credit. So the idea is not applying for a lot of different accounts at the same time. So again, when it comes to your credit, is making your on-time payments every month and keeping your balances as low as possible. That's the big thing. So you can apply for a credit card, they'll ask you for things like your income, because that's what they'll determine whether they want to give you a credit card, and if so, what the limit is. So they'll want to know your income every month, and then they're going to check your credit report and your credit score. They'll ask your social security number for that. They'll want to check your credit report and score to see how much they want to lend to you. So you might be qualified for what's called a regular credit card, in which case you'll get like a certain limit on the card that you can spend up to. Again, with a credit card, though, if you don't pay your bill in full on time at the end of every month, you will owe interest. So let's say you spent $200 on your credit card this month, but you only pay back $100. In that case, you're going to owe interest, and the interest rates on credit cards are very high, usually 18 to 25%. So in that case, you're going to not only have to pay back the money that you didn't pay off at the end of the month, but now that's going to start growing with interest. So the key there is to make sure you only spend money on a credit card that you can pay off through your checking account when your bill comes in. This is, again, someone asked, like, what's the most important thing? This one gets big flashing lights too. That so many people get into trouble because they put more money on credit cards than they can afford to pay off. Then the interest just starts building up, and it becomes sort of a spiral. So again, only put money on credit cards that you can afford to pay off at the end of the month. And so by doing that, by being able to pay your bill in full at the end of every month, you will again start to build your credit up. If your either income is low or you don't have much credit history, you might not be approved for a regular credit card, in which case you can get what's called a secured credit card. These are offered by banks, other companies, and what these are is that you'll put a deposit into account, sort of like a bank account, but then they'll issue you a credit card. And just like a regular credit card, you'll spend on it, pay your bill back in full at the end of the month. But because you're having to pay yourself back, it's treated like a credit card. And so you'll start building up your payment history. And usually after several months of payments of being responsible, spending well below your limit and paying it off in full, usually then they'll convert your card into they'll ask to convert your card into a regular credit card, and then you get the money that you deposited back, and then you can start using it just like a regular credit card. So either whether it's a regular credit card or secured credit card, that is something to consider. But again, only when you feel comfortable, making sure that you know when your payment is due each month. That's important. Put it on your calendar. This is when my statement comes in, and I'd recommend paying your bill off right when the statement comes in, so that way you don't have to worry about waiting until it's due. So only spending what you have in your checking account and paying your bill in full on time at the end of the month. If you do those two things, not only will you be in much better shape in terms of improving your credit score, but then you'll also be in better shape in terms of your budget, because you're not going to have to put, paying interest into your spending and saving plan. We talked a little bit about the credit utilization ratio. Again, trying to keep your balances as low as possible. Again, these are some other slides sort of about debt. Just like you want to keep the amount owed compared to your credit, you want to also keep your debt low, your debt payments each month low compared to your total income, because you want to have money to spend on other things. So again, be very careful when it comes to getting in debt and making sure, for example, let's say you get a car loan, that it fits within your spending and savings plan each month. Again, okay, so just wrapping up. So to maintain good credit, the key is paying all your bills on time in full each month, which lets you avoid late fees and paying interest. Again, keeping your balances low, paying off that credit card bill in full every month. And again, don't using your credit card to be tempted to live and spend beyond your means. And again, that's why it's important to have, knowing what you have coming in and out each month, to know, how much can you actually afford to put on a credit card, and really mostly just thinking about your credit card for your regular spending. Okay, let me look through the chat just to see. We're going to go on to a different topic. Yeah, so someone put in there a secured credit card that they used. Yeah, someone put here, one thing to note about your credit card or your credit report, a couple of things that are not on your credit report. Your income is not on your credit report, and your net worth is not on your credit report. So someone gave a good example in there of someone who had had a very high income, but had never used credit report before. So their credit score was very low because they had no experience with credit card or anything like that. So that's why it can be helpful, and especially at your age and your time in life, if you start by starting with credit now, you're starting the clock early, and again, you're giving your credit score more time to grow. But again, but you're using credit, but using it responsibly. That's the real key, because it's going to be really tempting to spend money on it. But again, have that spending and savings plan in place. You have, where you're sending your savings every month, and knowing, just putting a little bit of money that you can afford to pay off on that credit card. Okay, so now this is my favorite section of the slide. So, what we've talked about so far is kind of the detailed work. It's not very, thinking about your goals is fun, but, counting up your income, expenses or whatever, this is kind of the base work that we're doing. This next section is the really exciting part. This is about when we're able to save and invest for our future and how that can grow over time. So we talked before about the idea of paying yourself first. Again, sending that money from your paycheck automatically into your savings account, and we'll talk about investment accounts very shortly, because this is money that you're saving for the future. So we're going to start by talking, and then we talked about our goals as well. Again, you putting some money away for emergency savings. Maybe you have a short-term, medium-term, long-term goal. But the key here is what I want to talk about is the difference between saving and investing. Now, you might have heard these two terms before, and they have similar meanings, but they're very different. So what we're talking about with savings today, this saving is for your short-term goals, usually about 3 years or less, maybe 3 to 5 years or fewer. So for example, this could be your emergency fund because you might need your emergency fund tomorrow. Maybe you're saving for a vacation this year. Maybe you're saving for to buy people presents for the holidays at the end of the year. Maybe you're saving for a car loan in a couple of years. So this is what we're talking about, savings. So when you have savings, you want to put your money in a place that's very safe and that you'll be able to access it. So for example, putting savings in a bank savings account can be a good idea because a bank savings account will pay you interest for keeping your money there. Depending on the bank, it might be anywhere from, let's say, 1% to 3%. And you can shop around at different banks to find higher savings rates. So for example, a lot of banks, online banks will often pay more in savings than banks that have to pay for, big buildings and things like that. So you can look around for that. But the key here is that your money is going to be safe in the bank and that you'll be earning interest, which is great. Now, one other thing that's nice about keeping your money in the bank is that it's covered by what's called FDIC insurance. And this is where the government guarantees that if you have less than $250,000 per bank, that they'll cover your money in case something happens to the bank and then it goes out of business. So for example, you might have heard in the news earlier this year that there were a few banks that folded, that went out of business. But anyone at those banks who had less than $250,000 in the bank, they were able to access all of their money basically right away because of this FDIC insurance. So again, this is much safer keeping your money there than keeping your money in cash behind your bed or something like that, where it could be lost or stolen or things like that. So that's for savings. So that your money will grow a little bit with interest, but also that you can access it whenever you need it. You can move money right away, basically from your savings account to your checking account. Sometimes it takes a day or two, but that's money you can access right away. So when you think of saving, think of near-term goals, might need the money in the near future. Investing, on the other hand, is that this is money for the distant future. So this is for our goals, I would say, that are 5 years or beyond. Maybe so this could be saving for retirement, saving for a longer term goal. And the reason that before that is investing comes with higher potential return than you would get, let's say, on a savings account, but it also comes with higher risk. And when we talk about risk, this is the risk that you could lose money. So let's say I could put $1,000 into my investing account. It's hopefully going to grow over time, but it could also lose money. And we're going to talk about ways to invest, things like investing in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs. We're going to talk about that shortly. But so the key here, but with savings, when you put your money in your bank, you're going to be able to get that money out. So that's why you want that guarantee for those short-term goals that you need over 3 to 5 years. Investing, on the other hand, because it can go up or down over time, you want to know that, okay, I don't really need that money for many years. So if it goes down soon, I have enough time for it to go back up before I actually need the money. So again, when you think of savings, near-term safe, investing, looking for a higher return for our longer-term goals. And this is one of the big things I want to show you, and one of the things that's exciting for someone at your age in life. So this is an example of investing for the future. So we're going to assume that these people earn an average rate of return of 7% on their money, which is about right for the average rate of return for the stock market. Though again, they're not going to earn 7% every year, but over the long term, that might be what they earn. So this year they might earn 10%, next year they earn 2%, the year after that they earn -5%, they actually lose money, the year after that they earn 20%. It goes up and down over time, but the long-term trend is upward. So in this case, what this person does is they're investing in a retirement account, which we'll talk about shortly. They put in $200, about $208 every month. And they work at a company that matches that. So many employers for your retirement accounts will actually match whatever you put in. So their employer matches $208. So they're putting in a total of $417 a month, which comes out to about $5,000 a year. So let's look at these 3 examples. Susan invests $5,000 a year from age 25 to 35. So for only 10 years. So that means, $5,000 a year for 10 years. That's $50,000. And remember, she herself only invested $25,000. Her employer kicked in the rest. At age 65, with that rate of growth, she's going to have $600,000. So she went from $50,000 to $600,000, all because of that, what's called compounding growth, which is where your money is growing and earning this interest rate over time. But then eventually that interest or that rate of return that you earn, that earns money as well. And it grows and grows and grows over time. So the key is that you're putting money in regularly and letting it grow over time. Here's another example. Bill here, he invests $5,000 a year from age 35 to 65. So he's now invested 3 times as much as Susan. But because he started later and gave his money less time to grow, he's only going to have about $540,000, which is still a lot of money. But again, it shows how valuable it is to start sooner when it comes to investing. And Chris here, Chris invests $5,000 a year from age 25 to 65. So basically Chris's entire career. So his total investment is $200,000. So 40 years times 5,000. He ends up with $1.1 million. So that shows, so again, let's go back to the beginning. So this is by being able to put away $200 a month and getting it matched by your employer. Again, that might seem like a lot, now depending on what your income is, but by starting small, and then again, remember we talked before, your income is probably going to increase over time as you get promotions, as you get new jobs. So again, as that money increases, if you are able to increase the amount of money you're contributing to your investments, that's the kind of growth that you're going to see. But even if you start small today, $100 a month, if you're able to start at that at 20 or 22 or 24 or whatever it is, again, you're giving yourself 40 years or longer to grow. And you might end up in Susan's situation here, where you're going to end up potentially with hundreds of thousands of dollars. The key is to start soon. And again, we talked about creating that gap where you have more money to save and invest each month. That can really help your money grow over time. So let me, there's something else I want to see before, okay. So something, it's not on here, but there is one slide I wanted to mention. So we talked about risk and reward before. So you can think of it sort of as a ladder. So the higher, we'll start at the bottom of the ladder, and the higher up we go is the higher risk, higher reward. And this is another one of these big messages I want to leave you with today, is typically the higher expected return you get, the higher risk that comes with it. So for example, if we're expecting something that's low risk, low return, that's something like a savings account. So you might get 2% of return from there, but you're guaranteed to get your money. So it's very, very low risk, but it's a fairly low return. Something a little bit higher would be investing in the stock market. So now we're expecting a higher return. Remember, we talked about that 7% long-term return before. But now we have to anticipate higher risk. And this comes again in the situation where you could either gain money or lose money in stocks. Stocks have had years where the broader stock market has gained 30% in 1 year. And there have been years when the stock market has lost 30% in 1 year. That's how wide the change can be. So usually it's a lot less. Maybe it'll gain 10% or lose 2% or whatever it is. But for that return, but over the long term, you might get 7%. But again, the cost of that is the risk that over time, it can go up and down. So again, if you just leave your money, you have it invested maybe in the broader stock market, and we'll talk about that shortly. You'll see that growth over time. As long as you leave your money in, it's going to have some ups and downs, but the trajectory is upward. But again, let's say I invested money, but I need that money, next month. Well, that's taking a big risk because my money could lose, several percent just by next month. So again, investing is crucial, but it's for the long term. Now, okay, so now we're climbing that ladder. We've gone from savings accounts to things like stocks. Now at the top of the ladder are like really risky things, something like cryptocurrencies, things like that. Now, instead of, maybe losing 30% or gaining 30% every year, these things at the top, cryptocurrency, collectibles, things like that, that can go down 50, 60, 70% in a year. So that's huge risk. And so again, the key here is to think the higher expected return, the higher risk. But the other piece there is if you see something, if it's, this is really kind of, maybe you're on TikTok or, Instagram or things like that. There are a lot of financial scams out there that are, sort of what you think of as the phrase too good to be true. Oftentimes, this is couched in the way of you're earning a higher return with very low risk. If anyone is offering you a high return with very little risk, that's where I want the alarm bells to go off in your head, because it just does not exist. Something with that. If something's offering a high return, you should understand what the risk is, and there should be a commensurate risk. If something is a low return, it should be, it should come with low risk. But if anyone's offering high return, low risk, usually that's something to avoid, because something's there's some fine print, or there's details, things like that. And actually, let me give you an example of this. You might have heard of the name Bernie Madoff. So several years ago, he was an investment manager, but he was offering his clients a very good return, like the returns that the stock market would make, with very low risk. Basically, he would never lose money. Like every year these clients saw their money would go up, and in no years did it go down, which, should have sent alarm bells going off that like this never happens. With return comes risk. And it turns out what he was doing was what's called a Ponzi scheme, which is that he takes in more money from people and he uses that money to pay off the first investors. And it's kind of a cycle. Eventually, you run out of new investors and then the whole thing collapses. And so a lot of people lost a lot of money because they did, and he ended up going to prison. But the alarm bells weren't going off in their head that, hey, with this high expected return, there should be risk going on there. So again, if you come across those kind of things, that's a big message. But again, investing more broadly and accepting the risk can be extremely valuable, as we saw on this slide with the investment growth. Something I do want to mention is when you start working full-time, many employers will have what's called a retirement plan. It might be called a 401k, a 403b, or a TSP if you go work for the federal government. These are all tax-benefited plans. I won't go into the specific details on this, but the idea basically is you take money directly out of your paycheck, get sent directly into your retirement account. And with a tax boost, either you don't pay taxes on it today or you don't pay taxes on it in the future, depending on which way you choose. But the idea is your money gets put in directly there. Again, sometimes your employer will match it. Be aware of the employer match and any restrictions on that, because that's basically free money that they're contributing to your account. But the idea is that you're putting your money there, you're investing it, it's going to grow over time. And then when you retire, maybe when you're 60 or 65, whatever, you're going to have this big pot of money to be able to take you through the rest of your years. So, but again, it can be really helpful, not only because you get this tax advantage, but also because you can get that employer match, which is really valuable. This is something to come back to. Vesting. Vesting means that sometimes for the employer match, they'll say, okay, we'll give you 20% of the match for every year you work here. So if you work there for 1 year and then you leave the company, they'll only give you 20% of the match that you've earned. Any amount of money that you contribute out of your own paycheck, that's always your money. You don't have to worry about that. But their match, they might only let you keep a part of that. So for example, on this graphic, it's 5 years. So if you stay at the company for 5 years, you get to keep the full match and it'll stay over time. So that's just something to be aware of. And then I did want to give one little thing on investments. So in terms of like investments and the types of investments, you might have heard of some of these, perhaps not. So there are different things out there. So first, let's talk about stocks. So stocks is an ownership in a company. So if you buy a share of stock, you are a part owner in a company. So today you could go out and buy a share of stock in Apple, let's say, and you'd be a very, very small owner, but you're a part owner of the company. There might be 100 million shares out there. So a very small owner. And so the value of your share of stock will go up and down over time, depending on how well the company does. Hopefully it'll go up. But buying individual stocks like that can be kind of risky because you're putting all your money in the fate of one specific company. So let's say you bought Apple stock and all of a sudden everyone wants to decide to buy Androids instead of Apple, instead of iPhones. Well, in that case, the price of Apple stock might go way down. It could go down 30, 40, 50%, depending on what happened. So that's why when it comes to investing, a really good practice is what's called diversification. So this is not just investing in one company or two companies, but investing in a lot of companies. One way to do this is investing in what's called index funds. So an index will follow a big pool of a lot of companies. So for example, you might find an index fund that invests in the S&P 500, which is 500 of the largest companies out there. So in this case, instead of putting all your money on just one company and crossing your fingers that they do well, you're instead of investing all in one, you're investing a little bit of money in 500 companies. So now if something bad happens to one of those companies, well, it's not as big of a deal because hopefully those other 499 companies are doing well. So that's an idea of diversification. So investing in what are called mutual funds or exchange traded funds that invest in a broader range of companies. And then the other type of investment I'll mention are bonds. So a bond is just a company or a government's way of borrowing money. So just like you would borrow money with a loan, they borrow money with bonds. So bonds are typically less risky than stocks, but also typically provide a lower return. So if you own the bond of a company, they will pay you interest, just like you would have to pay interest on a loan. So usually that interest rate is less than the return of stocks, but it's also less risky because the companies have to pay their bondholders before they pay their stockholders any money. So again, so typically people will have a combination of stocks and bonds being very diversified across both of them over time. And having that and letting it grow over time is often the path to growing your investments over time. That was a lot. So this is our final slide today. Again, what I've talked about here in an hour and 15 minutes, this could be like a whole semester long class. It's a lot of material. So again, I'd really encourage you to come back to the slides when they're sent to you, check in on them, remind yourself of some of the messages. This is the information for the Financial Empowerment Center and Bright Paths. You can go to the website, which is fecssoco.org. You can email, call. We offer all of these services. All of them are free. We have financial empowerment classes like this. Again, we do free one-on-one coaching sessions. So if you have questions about your specific, situation, maybe you're starting a new job and want to talk about which benefits you should choose, like health insurance or retirement plans, that's something we could help with. Or helping you get your, spending and saving together, or talking about insurance, things like that. Those are all things we can help you with in a coaching session. And again, it's free. So that information is there. So let me see if there are any final questions here.
Yes, and students, if I can jump in really quick,
Adam.
Definitely take advantage of these free resources. Financial literacy is so important for your career. I actually sent an email with the PowerPoint and their information.